Subscribe to Storylab for more stories. Now let's begin this one. Chapter 1. The Perfect Facade. Daniel Bradley adjusted his tie in the bathroom mirror of his suburban home, watching his reflection with the same calculating eyes that had once assessed enemy targets in Kosovo. To his neighbors in Millbrook Heights, he was just another insurance adjuster, quiet, methodical, unremarkable. They had no idea that beneath the pressed khakis and polo shirts lived a man who had spent 15 years in Army Special Operations before transitioning to freelance intelligence work. The facade was perfect, and it had to be. His cover identity allowed him to move freely, conduct surveillance, and eliminate threats without drawing attention. Even his wife Tracy believed the lie. Tracy Bradley, née Davis, was everything Daniel had thought he wanted when he decided to build a normal life. Blonde, vivacious, with a laugh that could light up a room. They'd met at a charity fundraiser 3 years ago, and she'd been drawn to his quiet confidence. What she didn't know was that her husband's business trips involved much darker work than processing insurance claims. "Danny, your coffee's getting cold," Tracy called from downstairs, her voice carrying that slight edge it had developed over the past 6 months. Daniel descended the stairs to find his wife scrolling through her phone, barely acknowledging his presence. She was dressed for her job at the county clerk's office, a position that had seemed perfect for a sheriff's wife when she'd first mentioned her work friend, Warren Lockwood. Warren Lockwood, sheriff of Millbrook County, 42 years old, divorced with 2 teenage daughters he barely saw. Daniel had run a complete background check within hours of hearing the name. Clean record, exemplary service, but Daniel's instincts had immediately flagged something about the way Tracy's eyes lit up when she mentioned him. "Working late again tonight?" Daniel asked, noting how quickly she closed her phone screen. "County budget meeting. Warren thinks it might run past midnight." Tracy's response was practiced, smooth. She'd gotten better at lying. Daniel nodded, playing the understanding husband. "I'll probably be reviewing case files anyway. The Morrison claim is more complicated than I thought." There was no Morrison claim. Tonight, while Tracy thought he was buried in paperwork, Daniel would be confirming what he already knew. The micro-tracker he'd placed in her car's air freshener had been telling a story of late-night visits to an address that definitely wasn't the county building. As Tracy gathered her purse, she paused at the door. For a moment, Daniel saw something flicker across her face. Guilt, perhaps, or maybe just the weight of maintaining her own lies. "Love you, Danny," she said, the words feeling rehearsed. "Love you too, sweetheart." The door closed with a soft click, and Daniel's expression immediately hardened. He moved to the window, watching her silver Honda Accord disappear down Maple Street. In his previous life, he'd learned that betrayal came in many forms, sometimes from enemy combatants, sometimes from supposed allies, and sometimes from the people you shared a bed with. But Daniel Bradley never forgot a betrayal, and he never, ever forgave one. Moving to his home office, Daniel pulled out a secured satellite phone, one of many tools Tracy had never questioned. His contact answered on the first ring. "Buchanan. Chris, it's Bradley. I need a favor." Christopher Buchanan had been Daniel's handler during his transition from military to private sector work. Now working as a federal liaison, Chris still provided resources when Daniel's freelance assignments required government backing. "What do you need?" "Full surveillance package on Sheriff Warren Lockwood, Millbrook County. And I want to know everything about his relationship with my wife." A pause. "This personal or professional?" "Both. I have a feeling this goes deeper than adultery." Daniel understood predators. He'd spent years hunting them in foreign countries, and the instincts were the same everywhere. Warren Lockwood might wear a badge, but there was something in his profile that screamed danger. The kind of man who didn't just steal another man's wife. He destroyed lives for sport. As Daniel began laying out surveillance photos and behavioral analysis reports across his desk, he felt the familiar cold clarity that came before an operation. Tracy and Warren thought they were playing games with a mild-mannered insurance adjuster. They had no idea they'd declared war on a man who had never lost a battle. Chapter 2. Unraveling Threads. 2 weeks later, Daniel sat in his rented surveillance van 3 blocks from the Riverside Motel, watching Warren Lockwood's police cruiser in the parking lot through high-powered optics. The sheriff had been inside room 237 for 47 minutes. Tracy's Honda was parked around back, hidden from casual observation, but not from Daniel's carefully positioned cameras. His secure laptop chimed with an encrypted message from Christopher Buchanan. The background check on Warren had revealed interesting details that went far beyond a simple affair. Bradley, your sheriff has connections. 3 suspicious deaths in his jurisdiction over the past 5 years. All ruled accidents or suicides. All had something in common. They'd filed complaints against local law enforcement, sending full files. This might be bigger than personal. CB. Daniel's jaw tightened as he scrolled through the attachments. Marcus Wheeler, a local teacher who'd witnessed police brutality, apparent suicide by hanging. Sarah Chun, a journalist investigating missing evidence from drug busts, car accident on a clear, dry road. Tommy Rodriguez, a mechanic who'd serviced police vehicles and started asking questions about modifications. Overdose, despite no history of drug use. The pattern was clear to anyone who knew how to look. Warren Lockwood wasn't just a corrupt cop. He was a systematic killer who used his badge as cover. And now he had Tracy helping him, whether she knew it or not. Through his earpiece, Daniel could hear the conversation from the motel room, thanks to the listening device he'd planted earlier that week. What he heard made his blood run cold. The Bradley problem needs to be handled soon. Warren's voice crackled through the static. He's been asking too many questions around town. Someone mentioned seeing him near the Chin accident site last month. Daniel's grip tightened on the steering wheel. He'd been investigating Sarah Chin's death as part of a freelance assignment for her editor. He'd been careful, but apparently not careful enough. You really think Danny knows something? Tracy's voice held a note of genuine concern that might have been touching if she weren't discussing his potential murder. I think your husband isn't as boring as he pretends to be. My contact at the FBI ran his prints from that coffee cup you brought me. Daniel Bradley officially died in a car accident in Montana 5 years ago. The silence stretched for several seconds before Tracy spoke again. What does that mean? It means whoever you're married to, it's not Daniel Bradley. And people who fake their deaths usually have very good reasons for doing it. Daniel allowed himself a cold smile. Warren was smarter than he'd given him credit for, but not smart enough. The Montana death had been part of his transition out of official military service, a staged accident to create the clean identity he needed for freelance work. But Warren's FBI contact would only find the cover story, not the real history buried beneath layers of classified documents. So what do we do? Tracy asked. Same thing we did with the others. Except this time, we make sure there's no body to find. How about a boat? We take him out to the deep water, weight him down good, and let the river do the rest. Warren, I don't know if I can. You're in this now, baby. Too deep to back out. Besides, once he's gone, there's nothing stopping us from being together. I'm thinking about that life insurance policy you mentioned. Daniel had heard enough. He closed the laptop and started the van's engine, his mind already calculating the next phase of his operation. Warren and Tracy had just admitted to multiple murders and were planning his own death. In the old days, he would have called in an airstrike and watched the building burn. But this was personal now. This required a more intimate approach. As he drove back toward town, Daniel made a mental inventory of resources he'd need. His safe house in the industrial district contained enough weapons and equipment to outfit a small army. His contact network spanned 3 continents. And most importantly, he had something Warren and Tracy didn't expect: the patience to let them make the first move. They wanted to kill Daniel Bradley, the insurance adjuster. Instead, they were about to meet the man who had once cleared an entire terrorist cell using nothing but a knife and his bare hands. But first, he had a phone call to make. "Marcos, it's Bradley," he said when his backup contact answered. "I need you to activate the protection protocols for my wife. She doesn't know what she's gotten into, but she's about to become a very dangerous woman." Marcos Holland, another former military operative now working private security, didn't ask questions. How dangerous? The kind that ends with body bags if we're not careful. "I'm sending you everything I have on Sheriff Warren Lockwood. This is going to get messy. When do we move?" Daniel checked his watch. If his analysis was correct, Warren and Tracy would make their move within the next 72 hours. They'd wait for the right opportunity, probably one of his supposed business trips when his absence wouldn't be immediately noticed. Soon, but I want them to think they're winning first. The best traps look like opportunities. As Daniel pulled into his driveway, he saw Tracy's Honda already in the garage. She was home early, probably preparing for whatever story she'd tell about tonight's budget meeting. He paused at the front door, listening to her moving around inside, humming softly as she prepared to look him in the eye and lie. The old Daniel might have felt something resembling heartbreak, but that man had died in a dozen different conflicts across 3 continents. What remained was a predator who had just learned that his prey was more dangerous than expected, and infinitely more deserving of what was coming. Chapter 3. Into the Trap. The call came on a Thursday evening, exactly 48 hours after Daniel had overheard the motel room conversation. He was in his study, apparently reviewing insurance files, when his secure phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "Mr. Bradley, we have your wife. Cabin at Miller's Point. Come alone. Bring no weapons. You have 1 hour. W." Daniel stared at the screen, processing the tactical situation. Miller's Point was an isolated area 20 miles north of town, accessible only by a single dirt road that wound through thick forest. Perfect for an ambush, but also perfect for what Daniel had planned. He'd been expecting this move for 2 days, ever since planting subtle evidence that he was getting too close to Warren's other activities. The bait had been a series of staged photographs left where Tracy would find them. Pictures of the Chun accident site, copies of police reports with highlighted discrepancies, and a fake investigation timeline that suggested he was weeks away from exposing everything. What Warren and Tracy didn't know was that Daniel had been to Miller's Point before. 3 months ago, while scouting potential safe sites for a different operation, he'd mapped every approach, identified all the tactical advantages, and even cached supplies in a hidden bunker he'd constructed in the woods. Daniel checked his watch, 9:47 p.m. If he left now, he'd arrive exactly on schedule. But first, he activated the emergency protocol he'd established with his backup team. A single text message to Christopher Buchanan, going dark. "Lockwood has made his move. If you don't hear from me by midnight, execute Blackwater Protocol." Blackwater Protocol was Daniel's nuclear option, a complete evidence dump that would simultaneously expose Warren's murder spree, reveal Tracy's involvement, and trigger a federal investigation that would leave no stone unturned. It was his insurance policy and his revenge plan if things went sideways. The drive to Miller's Point took 37 minutes through winding country roads. Daniel's Renault sedan, a nondescript gray Toyota that concealed armor plating and run-flat tires, handled the rough terrain with deceptive ease. As he climbed into the hills, Daniel's mind shifted into the cold, calculating state that had kept him alive through countless hostile operations. Through his night vision optics, Daniel could see the cabin's warm glow filtering through the trees. Warren's patrol car was parked out front, along with an unmarked SUV that Daniel's sources had identified as belonging to Deputy Jake Morris, Warren's most trusted accomplice, and, according to Chris's intelligence, his partner in at least 2 of the previous murders. Daniel parked exactly where Warren would expect him to, in full view of the cabin, vulnerable to crossfire from multiple angles. As he walked toward the front door, he appeared every inch the desperate husband coming to save his wife. What the watchers couldn't see were the ceramic knife blades concealed in his belt, the flashbang grenades disguised as cigarette packs, or the GPS beacon that was already transmitting his location to Marcos Holland's tactical team. The door opened before he could knock. Warren Lockwood stood silhouetted against the interior light, his service weapon drawn but held casually at his side. He was exactly what Daniel had expected, tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of confidence that came from years of unchallenged authority. "Mr. Bradley, or should I say, whoever you really are." Daniel raised his hand slightly, playing the part. "Where's my wife?" Warren gestured him inside with the gun barrel. The cabin's interior was spartanly furnished, a few chairs, a table, and a stone fireplace that cast dancing shadows across the walls. Tracy sat in one of the chairs, her hands zip-tied behind her back and duct tape covering her mouth. Her eyes were wide with fear, but Daniel couldn't tell if she was afraid for him or of him. She's fine. For now. Warren moved to stand behind Tracy's chair, his free hand resting on her shoulder in a gesture that was both possessive and threatening. The question is, what happens to both of you depends on how honest you're willing to be. Deputy Morris emerged from the kitchen, also armed. He was younger than Warren, with the nervous energy of someone who was in over his head but too committed to back out. Daniel filed away his position and stance. Morris was the weak link, the one who would break first under pressure. "See, here's what I think happened," Warren continued, beginning to pace. "I think you're some kind of federal agent. FBI, maybe DEA, doesn't matter. Point is, you've been sniffing around my business, and that stops tonight." Daniel let confusion cross his features. "Federal agent? Warren, I adjust insurance claims. I drive a 15-year-old sedan, and my biggest excitement is finding discrepancies in medical billing." "Really?" Warren smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Then explain this." He nodded to Morris, who produced a manila folder. Inside were photographs, Daniel near the Chun accident site, detailed notes about police evidence procedures, and a timeline that would have impressed even seasoned investigators. "You've been busy, Danny. 3 months of surveillance, questioning witnesses, analyzing crime scenes. That's not insurance work. That's investigation." Daniel maintained his bewildered expression. "I don't understand. Tracy, what is he talking about?" It was then that Tracy made her choice. She shook her head frantically, making muffled sounds behind the tape. When Warren pulled it away, her first words weren't what Daniel expected. "Danny, run. He's going to kill us both. Warren's insane. He murdered those people, and he thinks you know about it." The surprise on Warren's face was genuine. Whatever he'd expected from Tracy, it wasn't a betrayal. But Daniel had seen this before. When death became real, people often discovered loyalties they didn't know they had. "Shut up." Warren backhanded Tracy across the face, sending her chair toppling sideways. "You stupid bitch, you were supposed to." That's when Daniel moved. The first ceramic blade took Morris in the throat before he could raise his weapon. The second buried itself in Warren's gun hand, causing him to drop his service pistol. In the space of 3 seconds, Daniel had transformed from mild-mannered insurance adjuster to lethal predator. But Warren was tougher than his deputy. Instead of going for his weapon, he lunged for Tracy, hauling her upright and pressing a backup pistol to her temple. "Stop right there. I don't know who you are, but your wife dies if you take another step." Daniel froze, calculating angles and probabilities. At this distance, with an unstable shooter holding a hostage, even his enhanced reflexes couldn't guarantee Tracy's safety. "Let her go, Warren. Your fight is with me. My fight is with whoever's been trying to destroy my life." Warren's voice was rising, panic beginning to override his tactical thinking. "You think I don't know what this is? You're trying to frame me for murders I didn't commit." Daniel almost laughed. Even now, with the evidence stacked against him, Warren was trying to maintain his innocence. But there was something in his tone, a genuine confusion that made Daniel recalculate the situation. If you didn't kill them, then who did? Warren's expression shifted, and for a moment, Daniel saw not a corrupt sheriff but a man who was in over his head. I covered things up, made evidence disappear, but I never killed anyone." "Then who?" The rifle shot came through the window, taking Warren's head apart in a spray of blood and bone. Tracy's scream echoed through the cabin as Daniel dove for cover, his mind racing through new calculations. Someone else was here. Someone who had been waiting for this exact moment. As Daniel dragged Tracy behind the overturned table, he could hear vehicles approaching. Multiple engines, moving fast. Through the shattered window, muzzle flashes lit up the darkness like deadly fireflies. This wasn't Warren's endgame. This was someone else's cleanup operation. And Daniel Bradley was about to discover that he'd walked into a trap far more sophisticated than anything a small-town sheriff could have devised. Chapter 4. Wolves in the Dark. The gunfire erupted from 3 directions simultaneously, turning the cabin's windows into showers of glass and splinters. Daniel pressed himself against the floor, pulling Tracy down beside him as bullets chewed through the wooden walls above their heads. In the strobing muzzle flashes, he caught glimpses of their attackers, at least 6 figures in tactical gear, moving with military precision. This wasn't random violence. This was a coordinated strike by professionals. "Danny, what's happening?" Tracy's voice was barely audible over the gunfire, her face streaked with Warren's blood. "Someone who wants us both dead," Daniel replied, his mind racing through tactical options. The cabin's construction was typical rural American: wood frame, minimal cover, multiple vulnerability points. They had perhaps 90 seconds before the attackers finished their suppression fire and moved to assault positions. Daniel's fingers found the GPS beacon clipped to his belt. Marcos Holland's team would be responding to the emergency signal, but they were at least 20 minutes out. In a firefight, 20 minutes might as well be 20 hours. The gunfire paused, and Daniel heard the distinctive sound of magazines being reloaded. In that brief lull, he recognized something that chilled his blood. The attackers were communicating in Russian. "Sector clear. Moving to position 2. Target acquisition negative. Confirm Bradley location. Orders are both subjects eliminated. No witnesses." Daniel's blood went cold. Whoever had sent this team knew his real name and wanted him dead specifically. This wasn't about Warren's local corruption. This was connected to his previous life. "Listen to me carefully," he whispered to Tracy. "When I move, you go out the back window and run for the tree line. Don't stop, don't look back. Follow the creek bed north for 2 miles, then wait for pickup. I'm not leaving you." "Yes, you are." Daniel's voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed in life-or-death situations. "These people are here to kill us both. Your only chance is if I can buy you time to escape." He pressed a small device into her hand, an emergency beacon that would guide Marcos' team to her location. "Press the button when you reach the creek. Help will come." Before Tracy could protest further, Daniel grabbed Warren's dropped service weapon and the spare ammunition from Morse's belt. The dead deputy also carried flashbang grenades and a tactical knife, tools Daniel could use. The assault began 30 seconds later. The front door exploded inward as breaching charges detonated simultaneously with the rear entrance. Smoke grenades filled the interior with thick, choking clouds while tactical lights swept through the haze, searching for targets. Daniel was already moving. The first attacker through the front door met Daniel's knife between his ribs, the blade finding the gap in his tactical vest with surgical precision. Daniel stripped the man's rifle and rolled toward the fireplace as automatic weapons fire chewed through the space where he'd been standing. Through the chaos, he saw Tracy disappearing through the shattered back window, her silhouette briefly visible against the starlight before the forest swallowed her. Good. At least one of them might survive this. The second attacker rounded the corner into Daniel's field of fire. 3-round burst, center mass, target down. But these weren't amateurs. They adapted quickly, using coordinated movement and overlapping fields of fire to box him in. Bradley located. Kitchen area. Initiate containment protocol. Daniel moved before they could execute their maneuver, using the fireplace chimney as cover while he planned his next move. The tactical situation was deteriorating rapidly. Too many shooters, too little cover, and no clear escape route. That's when the explosion started outside. Marcos Holland's voice crackled through Daniel's earpiece. "Daniel, this is Overwatch. We are engaging hostile forces on your perimeter. Keep your head down and wait for my signal." Through the cabin's walls, Daniel could hear the distinctive sound of his backup team's arrival, suppressed sniper fire, coordinated assault positions, and the kind of tactical chatter that marked elite operators. Marcos had brought serious firepower. The Russian voices outside grew more urgent. Federal response team on site. Execute extraction protocol. Primary target elimination is priority 1. Negative. Too much heat. Fall back to secondary positions. Command will not accept mission failure. Bradley dies tonight. Daniel smiled grimly. Whoever had sent this team clearly didn't understand who they were dealing with. The old Daniel Bradley might have been vulnerable, But the man who had survived 3 tours in hostile territory and countless black operations wasn't going down without a fight. Using the Russians' momentary confusion as they repositioned to deal with Marcos's team, Daniel moved to Warren's body and retrieved the sheriff's backup weapon, a .357 revolver that would be reliable in close quarters. He also found something unexpected, a thumb drive in Warren's shirt pocket, wrapped in waterproof plastic. Whatever was on that drive was important enough for Warren to protect it even while planning a murder. Daniel pocketed it as the cabin's remaining windows exploded under sustained gunfire. "Daniel, this is Overwatch. We have multiple hostiles in retreat. Confirm your status. Alive and mobile. Tracy is in the wind, heading north along the creek bed. Priority is her extraction. Understood. We have thermal signature moving through the trees. Dispatching recovery team." The firefight continued for another 7 minutes, but the tide had turned. Marcos's team was using night vision and thermal optics against enemies who were now operating in full retreat mode. One by one, the muzzle flashes went silent. When the silence finally came, it was absolute. Daniel waited another 60 seconds before moving, his weapon ready, as he cleared each room of the cabin. Morris and Warren were dead, along with 2 of the Russian operatives. The others had vanished into the forest, but they'd left behind evidence, weapons, equipment, and most importantly, tactical communications gear that might reveal who had sent them. "Building secure," Marcos announced as he entered through the destroyed front door. 4 hostiles down, 3 escaped. "Tracy is safe. We found her at the creek, and she's being medically evaluated." Daniel holstered his weapon and surveyed the carnage. This wasn't about Warren's local operation. Someone used his corruption as cover for a much bigger play. Any idea who? Daniel held up the thumb drive he'd taken from Warren's body. "Maybe. But first I need to know how Russian special forces knew I was going to be here tonight." The implications were chilling. Someone with access to high-level intelligence had orchestrated this entire scenario: Warren's corruption, the affair with Tracy, even Daniel's investigation. They'd been manipulated into this confrontation, and only Marcos's timely intervention had prevented it from ending with everyone dead. As Marcos coordinated the cleanup operation, Daniel stepped outside the cabin and looked up at the star-filled sky. Somewhere out there, the people responsible for tonight were probably already planning their next move. They'd made one crucial mistake, though. They tried to kill Daniel Bradley and failed. Now, he wasn't just investigating corruption or dealing with a cheating wife. Now, he was hunting the people who had turned his life into a war zone. And Daniel Bradley had never lost a war. Chapter 5, Digital Ghosts. The safe house in the industrial district looked like any other abandoned warehouse from the outside. Inside, however, it contained enough surveillance equipment and weapons to outfit a small military unit. Daniel sat at a bank of computer monitors, the thumb drive from Warren's body connected to an air-gapped system designed to analyze digital evidence without risking contamination of his primary networks. Tracy sat across the room, wrapped in a blanket and nursing a cup of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. She hadn't spoken much since Marcos's team had extracted her from the woods. The psychological shock of watching Warren's head explode, followed by a running gun battle through the forest, had left her in a state of stunned silence. The drive contains financial records, Christopher Buchanan reported over the secure video link. Wire transfers, offshore accounts, payment schedules. Warren was receiving money from a shell company called Meridian Solutions. $50,000 every month for the past 3 years. Daniel scrolled through the files, his expression growing darker with each revelation. Payment for what services? According to the metadata, Warren was providing intelligence on federal investigations in his jurisdiction. Specifically, any FBI or DEA operations that might impact certain business interests in the region. What kind of business interests? That's where it gets complicated. Chris's face on the monitor looked grim. Meridian Solutions is owned by another shell company, which is owned by another shell company. But if you follow the ownership chain far enough, it leads to Viktor Petrov. Daniel's blood went cold. Viktor Petrov was a name from his previous life, a Russian oligarch with connections to organized crime, arms dealing, and human trafficking. More importantly, Petrov had a personal grudge against Daniel dating back to an operation in Chechnya that had cost the Russian several $1 million and his younger brother. So this was never about Warren and Tracy, Daniel said, the pieces finally clicking into place. Petrov has been planning this for years. He identified Warren as a useful asset, turned him into a paid informant, then used Tracy to get close to me. It gets worse, Chris continued. According to these records, Tracy wasn't an accidental target. Petrov's people researched your background, identified her as someone who fit your psychological profile, and arranged for you to meet her at that charity fundraiser 3 years ago. Across the room, Tracy's head snapped up. What? No, that's not. Danny and I met by chance. I was working the registration table, and he came over to ask about the silent auction. Daniel turned to look at his wife, or the woman he'd thought was his wife. What was the name of the charity? Hope for Tomorrow Foundation. They help disadvantaged children. A foundation that existed for exactly 6 months, organized exactly one event, and disappeared immediately afterward, Daniel said quietly. Chris, I need you to pull Tracy's complete background. Everything from birth certificates to credit reports. Already on it. Daniel, I'm sorry, but Tracy Davis didn't exist before she met you. The identity was created 3 months before the charity event. Birth certificate backdated, social security number issued through fraudulent channels, employment history fabricated. The silence in the warehouse was deafening. Tracy's face had gone white, her coffee cup slipping from nerveless fingers to shatter on the concrete floor. That's impossible, she whispered. I remember my childhood. My parents died in a car accident when I was 16. I lived with my aunt until I graduated high school. Your aunt who died conveniently 2 months before you met Daniel. Chris continued relentlessly. No surviving relatives, no close friends who could contradict the cover story. Whoever programmed, you did an excellent job. Daniel watched Tracy's face as the truth hit her. The confusion, the denial, the growing horror as she realized that her entire life was a lie. Either she was the most accomplished actress he'd ever encountered, or she genuinely believed she was Tracy Davis. Memory implantation, Daniel said, the words tasting bitter. It's experimental technology, but the Russians have been working on it for decades. They can create false memories so detailed and convincing that the subject genuinely believes they're real. No. Tracy stood up abruptly, backing toward the wall. No, you're both insane. I know who I am. I know my life. I remember. What do you remember? Daniel asked gently. Describe your 16th birthday. Tracy opened her mouth, then closed it. Her expression grew troubled. We had cake. Chocolate cake with strawberry frosting. My parents gave me a necklace. What kind of necklace? What did your parents look like? What were their names? With each question, Tracy's confidence cracked a little more. The details that should have been crystal clear, the faces of her parents, the layout of her childhood home, the names of her high school friends, were suddenly fuzzy, indistinct. This is a psychological attack, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. You're trying to make me doubt myself. Marcos entered the warehouse, carrying a thick file folder. Memory analysis is complete. We found the implantation markers, specific neural patterns that indicate artificially induced memories. Whoever did this to you is very good at their job. Daniel studied the woman he'd been married to for 3 years. In one sense, she was as much a victim as he was, a weapon crafted by his enemies and aimed at his heart. But in another sense, she was the most dangerous threat he'd ever faced because he still cared about her. The question, Daniel said, is whether the affair with Warren was part of your programming or a genuine choice. Tracy's face crumpled. I don't know anymore. I thought I loved him, but now I can't tell what's real and what's not. The secure phone rang, interrupting the emotional minefield they were navigating. Daniel answered on the first ring. Bradley. Mr. Bradley, this is Agent Rosa Schaefer, FBI Counterintelligence. We need to talk. Viktor Petrov has activated additional assets in your area, and we have reason to believe the attack at Miller's Point was just the opening move. Daniel looked around the warehouse, at the weapons, the surveillance equipment, The woman whose entire existence was a lie designed to destroy him. 3 years of marriage, 3 years of thinking he'd found peace, 3 years of building a life that had been rotting from the inside like a poison tree. Agent Schaefer, I think it's time Viktor Petrov learned that some people are too dangerous to manipulate. Mr. Bradley, I need you to stay put and let federal law enforcement handle this situation. Daniel smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Agent Schaefer, federal law enforcement has been trying to handle Viktor Petrov for 15 years. I handled his brother in 48 hours. He hung up the phone and turned to Marcos. How long would it take to arrange transport to Montenegro? 6 hours. But Daniel, if you go after Petrov directly, you'll be walking into a fortress surrounded by private military contractors and government protection. Good. I prefer a direct approach. Daniel began gathering equipment from the weapons locker. High-velocity rifles, shaped charges, communications gear, and the kind of tools that turned one man into an army. Tracy watched him prepare for war, her face a mixture of fear and something that might have been admiration. What about me? What happens to the woman who doesn't really exist? Daniel paused in his preparations. The old him might have tried to save her, might have attempted to separate the victim from the weapon. But the man who had survived 3 years of psychological manipulation was done trying to rescue people who had participated in their own destruction. That depends. Do you want to discover who you really are, or do you want to keep living Viktor Petrov's version of your life? The question hung in the air like smoke from a funeral pyre. Because whatever Tracy decided, Daniel Bradley was done being anyone's target. Now he was going hunting. Chapter 6, The Devil's Bargain. Agent Rosa Schaefer arrived at the warehouse 30 minutes after Daniel's phone call, accompanied by a tactical team that clearly expected resistance. What she found instead was Daniel sitting calmly at a conference table, detailed maps of Montenegro spread before him like he was planning a vacation. Mr. Bradley, you need to stand down. Viktor Petrov is under federal surveillance, and any unauthorized action could compromise years of investigation. Daniel didn't look up from his maps. Agent Schaefer, how many American citizens has Viktor Petrov killed while under your surveillance? That's classified information. The answer is 47. Daniel finally raised his eyes to meet hers. I've done my research. 47 confirmed kills on American soil over the past 5 years, and your investigation has produced exactly 0 indictments. Rosa Schaefer was younger than Daniel had expected, probably early 30s, with the kind of sharp intelligence that came from surviving in the federal bureaucracy while maintaining actual principles. She wore her authority like armor, but Daniel could see the doubt beneath the professional facade. The situation is more complex than you understand. Petrov has diplomatic immunity and protection at the highest levels of government. We can't just send in a hit team. You can't. I can. Marcos cleared his throat from his position near the weapons locker. Actually, there might be a third option. Rosa, what if I told you we could give you Petrov's entire network? Names, accounts, operational details. Everything you need to roll up his organization permanently. Rosa's attention sharpened. I'm listening. Daniel activated a wall-mounted display, showing financial flowcharts that Christopher Buchanan had compiled from Warren's files and additional intelligence. Petrov has been building a network of corrupted officials across 6 states. Sheriffs, judges, federal agents, politicians. The thumb drive from Warren Lockwood is just one piece of a much larger puzzle. We could deliver all of it, Marcos continued. Complete evidence packages, witness testimony, financial records. Enough to destroy Petrov's American operations and put half his network in federal prison. In exchange for what? Daniel smiled coldly. Official sanction for a direct action mission against Petrov himself. No federal oversight, no questions about methods, and complete immunity for any collateral damage. Absolutely not. The FBI doesn't authorize assassination missions. Then you'll never get Petrov. He's too well protected, too connected, and too smart to be taken down through conventional law enforcement. Daniel stood and walked to one of the maps. But there's another problem. Petrov knows that I know about his network. He's going to start eliminating assets to protect himself. Your surveillance targets are going to start turning up dead. Rosa studied the intelligence displays, her expression calculating. How do you know all this? Because it's what I would do. Clean house, eliminate witnesses, and disappear until the heat dies down. By the time your investigation gets authorization to move, there won't be anyone left to arrest. He's right, said a new voice from the warehouse entrance. Christopher Buchanan entered, carrying a tablet that showed news feeds from across the region. 3 of Petrov's known associates died in the past 6 hours. Car accidents, home invasions, apparent suicides. The cleanup has already started. Rosa looked at the news reports, her face growing pale as she recognized names from her own investigation files. Judge Herman Willis, he was supposed to testify next month. Now he's dead, Daniel said bluntly, along with 2 sheriff's deputies and a county clerk. Petrov is cutting loose ends, and anyone connected to his network is a target. Tracy, who had been silent during the entire exchange, suddenly spoke up. Including me. Everyone turned to look at her. Since learning the truth about her identity, she'd been struggling with questions about her own nature and past. But something in her expression had changed, a hardness that hadn't been there before. If I'm a weapon he created, and if his network is being exposed, then I'm a liability. He'll want me dead too. Daniel nodded grimly. Which means anyone who tries to protect you is also a target. Every FBI safe house, every federal marshal, every witness protection program. He'll find you, and he'll eliminate everyone in his way. The implications sank in slowly. Rosa's investigation wasn't just compromised. It was actively endangering everyone involved. As long as Petrov remained free and operational, no one connected to the case would be safe. So what exactly are you proposing? Rosa asked. Simple, Daniel replied. You give me 48 hours. I go to Montenegro, I eliminate Petrov, and I download everything from his personal systems before his security team can sanitize the computers. You get complete intelligence on his network, his finances, and his operations. In return, I get immunity for any actions taken during the mission. And if you fail, then you proceed with your investigation knowing that you tried every option. But Agent Schaefer, I've read Viktor Petrov's file. He's not going to be taken alive, and he's not going to let himself be arrested. This ends with violence whether I'm involved or not. Rosa was quiet for a long moment, weighing federal protocols against practical realities. Daniel could see her calculating the political costs of authorizing an illegal assassination against the human costs of letting Petrov continue his operations. There would have to be conditions. No civilian casualties, no international incidents, and complete operational silence. If this goes wrong, the Bureau will deny any knowledge of your actions. Understood. And what about her? Rosa gestured toward Tracy. If she's really a programmed asset, she could be a security risk. Daniel looked at his wife, or the woman who had been his wife, or the victim who had been transformed into a weapon. The programming that had made her betray him might also make her betray any attempt to protect her. That's not your problem, he said finally. Tracy is my responsibility. What does that mean? Daniel's expression grew cold. It means I handle my own problems. Rosa studied his face and apparently decided she didn't want to know the details. 48 hours, Mr. Bradley. And then this becomes a federal investigation again. After Rosa and her team left, the warehouse fell silent except for the hum of electronic equipment. Daniel continued studying his maps, while Marcos checked weapons and communication gear. Tracy sat in the corner, lost in thoughts about memories that might not be real and a life that had been scripted by strangers. Danny, she said finally, using the name she called him for 3 years. When this is over, what happens to us? Daniel didn't look up from his maps. There is no us, Tracy. There never was. There was just me and a weapon designed to look like a wife. But if the memories are false, if I was programmed, doesn't that mean I'm not responsible for what I did? Now Daniel did look at her, and his eyes held no warmth at all. You chose to sleep with Warren Lockwood. Programming might have made you vulnerable to manipulation, but it didn't make that choice for you. So that's it? 3 years of marriage means nothing. 3 years of lies means exactly that. Nothing. Daniel returned to his maps, But Tracy's voice stopped him. Then why are you protecting me? Why not just let Petrov's people kill me and solve your problem? The question hung in the air for several heartbeats before Daniel answered. Because I keep my promises, even to weapons that look like wives. He began packing the weapons he would need for Montenegro, each piece of equipment selected with the cold precision of a man who had accepted that some problems could only be solved with violence. In 47 hours, Viktor Petrov would learn what happened when someone tried to turn Daniel Bradley's life into a weapon. Chapter 7. Into the Lion's Den. The Adriatic coastline of Montenegro gleamed like hammered silver in the pre-dawn light as Daniel's boat approached the private dock of Viktor Petrov's compound. From a distance, the estate looked like a luxury resort. White stone buildings cascading down the hillside, manicured gardens, and a yacht basin that could accommodate vessels worth tens of millions. But Daniel's enhanced optics revealed the defensive reality beneath the facade. Guard towers disguised as architectural features, motion sensors hidden among the landscaping, and roving patrols of men who moved with military precision. Petrov's fortress was designed to repel everything from yacht-based assaults to helicopter insertions. What it wasn't designed for was a single operative who had memorized every security protocol and defensive position from 3 months of satellite surveillance. Overwatch, this is Hunter. Beginning final approach. Christopher Buchanan's voice crackled through Daniel's earpiece from the FBI surveillance post 12 miles offshore. Copy, Hunter. Thermal shows 43 heat signatures in the compound. Petrov is confirmed in the main house, 3rd floor, eastern wing. Daniel checked his equipment one final time. Suppressed rifle, shaped charges, electronic warfare gear, and enough ammunition to fight his way through a small army. But his primary weapon wasn't hardware, it was information. For the past week, while Agent Rosa Schaefer believed he was planning a frontal assault, Daniel had been implementing a much more sophisticated strategy. Using intelligence gathered from Warren's files and additional sources, he'd identified 3 of Petrov's key lieutenants and systematically compromised their personal communications. The security chief believed there was an internal investigation into missing weapons. The financial officer thought a rival organization was planning to steal operational funds. The head of computer security was convinced that foreign intelligence services had penetrated their networks. Each man was primed to suspect the others of betrayal. Daniel just needed to light the fuse. He anchored his boat in a small cove 200 meters from the main dock and slipped into the water, his wetsuit and rebreather gear allowing him to approach underwater. The compound's sonar was sophisticated, but it was calibrated to detect vessels, not individual swimmers. Daniel reached the shore undetected and moved through the darkness toward his first objective, the communications center that controlled all external communications for the compound. If Petrov couldn't call for help, his private army would be operating blind. The guard patrol passed Daniel's position exactly on schedule. Petrov's security was professional but predictable. Daniel waited until they were 40 meters away, then sprinted across the open ground to the communications building. The door locks were electronic, but not beyond his capabilities. Within 90 seconds, Daniel was inside the building, planting charges designed to take out not just the communications equipment, but the backup power systems as well. But he wasn't just destroying communications, he was replacing them. The modified transmitter Christopher Buchanan had provided would override Petrov's internal radio network, allowing Daniel to broadcast messages that would appear to come from legitimate sources within a compound. The psychological warfare could begin. Daniel activated the device and began transmitting on the security chief's frequency. All units, this is Volkov. We have confirmation of insider betrayal. Kozlov is selling information to American agents. All security protocols are compromised. Initiate lockdown immediately. The response was immediate. Guard patrols began converging on the financial officer's quarters, while defensive positions were abandoned to search for an internal threat that didn't exist. Daniel moved to his second objective, the compound's power grid. Cutting electricity would force Petrov's security to rely on backup generators, which were located in a central building that Daniel could control. As he approached the power station, Daniel's earpiece crackled with intercepted communications from inside the compound. Kozlov, where the hell are you? Volkov says you've been compromised. What? I'm in my quarters. Volkov is the one who's been acting strange. Both of you shut up. Someone is playing games with our communications. The confusion was spreading exactly as Daniel had planned. Petrov's security was turning inward, suspecting each other rather than watching for external threats. Daniel reached the power station and quickly located the main electrical feeds. But instead of cutting power immediately, he installed remote switches that would allow him to control electricity to different sections of the compound. Darkness was a weapon, but selective darkness was even better. His next transmission went out on all frequencies. Emergency alert. American Special Forces have infiltrated the compound. They're using our own communications against us. Trust no one except direct visual confirmation from Mr. Petrov himself. That should paralyze their command structure completely. No one would know who to trust or what orders to follow. Daniel began his approach to the main house, where Viktor Petrov was undoubtedly wondering why his supposedly impregnable fortress was falling apart from the inside. But as Daniel moved through the gardens, his earpiece picked up a transmission that made his blood run cold. Sir, we have confirmation. The woman called Tracy Bradley is in federal custody in Washington. Should we proceed with elimination? Petrov's voice was calm, cultured, with just a hint of Russian accent. No. Bring her here. If Mr. Bradley wants his wife back, he'll have to come and get her. Daniel froze. Tracy was supposed to be in FBI protective custody, safely hidden while he dealt with Petrov. How had the Russian located her? Hunter, this is Overwatch. Chris's voice was urgent. We have a problem. Tracy Bradley disappeared from the safe house 6 hours ago. FBI thinks she was extracted by unknown parties. The implications hit Daniel like a physical blow. Either Petrov's network was deeper than anyone had realized, or Tracy's programming had activated in ways they hadn't anticipated. She was either a victim being used as bait, or she was still an active asset following orders she might not even be conscious of. But there was a third possibility that Daniel hadn't considered. Tracy might have chosen to come here willingly to confront the truth about her own existence and the people who had created her. Status on Petrov? Daniel asked. Still in the main house. But Daniel, thermal imaging shows at least 6 additional heat signatures that weren't there an hour ago. Someone arrived by helicopter. Daniel's jaw tightened. Petrov was staging a showdown, using Tracy as bait to draw Daniel into a trap. But the Russian had made one crucial miscalculation. He thought he was dealing with a man motivated by love and the desire to save his wife. Instead, he was facing someone who had already accepted that his marriage was dead and his wife was a weapon pointed at his heart. Daniel activated the power grid controls, plunging the entire compound into darkness except for the main house, which remained lit like a beacon. The message was clear. Petrov wanted him to come, and Daniel Bradley was happy to oblige. But not for the reasons Viktor Petrov expected. Chapter 8. Face to Face with the Devil. The main house of Petrov's compound was an exercise in understated luxury. Marble floors, original artwork, and furnishings that cost more than most people's homes. But as Daniel moved through the corridors, clearing rooms with methodical precision, he noticed details that revealed the building's true purpose. Bulletproof glass, reinforced walls, and sightlines designed for defensive operations. The ground floor was empty except for 2 guards who never saw Daniel coming. The second floor contained offices and conference rooms, all abandoned in the confusion he created. But as Daniel approached the 3rd floor, he could hear voices coming from what his intelligence suggested was Petrov's private study. Mr. Bradley, I know you're in the house. Why don't you join us? Your wife is eager to see you. Daniel paused at the foot of the stairs, analyzing the tactical situation. Petrov was confident enough to announce his location, which meant he either had overwhelming firepower or was certain that Daniel wouldn't risk harming Tracy. Either way, the Russian was operating from a position of perceived strength. That was about to change. Daniel climbed the stairs silently, his weapon ready but not aimed. At the top, He found a hallway lined with expensive artwork and a single door that stood slightly ajar. Light spilled through the gap, along with a murmur of conversation. "You can hear us, can't you, Mr. Bradley? Or should I call you by your real name? The ghost who destroyed my operations in Chechnya and killed my brother." Daniel approached the door, using a small mirror to assess the room's interior before exposing himself. What he saw made him pause. Petrov stood behind an ornate desk, relaxed and confident. To his right, two armed guards flanked a high-backed leather chair. And in that chair sat Tracy, apparently unrestrained and completely calm. "Hello, Danny," she said as Daniel entered the room. "I've been waiting for you." Daniel kept his weapon lowered but ready as he studied the scene. Tracy showed no signs of distress, no indication that she was being held against her will. The guards were alert but not aggressively positioned. Either this was an extremely sophisticated hostage situation or something else entirely was happening. "Viktor Petrov," Daniel said, acknowledging the man who had orchestrated 3 years of psychological warfare against him. "You look exactly like your photographs." Petrov was tall, silver-haired, with the kind of presence that commanded attention without effort. He wore an expensive suit that couldn't quite conceal the shoulder holster beneath his jacket, and his eyes held the cold intelligence of a predator who had never been anyone's prey. "Mr. Bradley, or perhaps I should say, Agent Bradley, your cover identity was quite impressive, though not as impenetrable as you believed. Former agent. I've been freelance for years." "Yes, we know. Your transition from military to private operations was thorough, but not thorough enough to prevent us from finding you." Daniel's attention kept drifting to Tracy, trying to read her expression and body language. She seemed different, more confident, more self-possessed. The confusion and vulnerability she'd shown at the warehouse had been replaced by something harder. "The question," Petrov continued, "is what happens now. You've caused considerable disruption to my operations, eliminated several valuable assets, and cost me a significant amount of money. Send me a bill." Petrov smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "I have a better idea. You're going to work for me." Daniel almost laughed. "You kidnapped my wife, tried to have me killed, and destroyed my life. Why would I work for you?" "Because your wife asked you to." The words hung in the air like poison gas. Daniel's attention snapped to Tracy, who was watching him with an expression he couldn't read. "Danny," she said softly, "there's something you need to understand. The programming didn't just give me false memories. It gave me access to Victor's entire network. Names, locations, operational details. Everything. What are you saying?" "I'm saying that I remember both lives now. The fabricated one, where I was Tracy Davis, and the real one, where I was Katerina Volkov, Victor's niece and a trained intelligence operative." The revelation hit Daniel like a physical blow. Not just false memories, but a completely false identity layered over someone who was already an enemy operative. Every moment of their marriage, every conversation, every intimate detail had been gathered by someone who was professionally trained to deceive. The affair with Warren wasn't part of her cover, Petrov explained. It was Katerina asserting her real personality against the false identity we'd imposed. She was trying to complete her mission by getting closer to Warren's intelligence on federal operations in the region. Daniel looked at the woman he'd thought was his wife, seeing her clearly for perhaps the first time. The softness in her features that he'd attributed to kindness was actually careful control. The hesitation he'd interpreted as vulnerability was operational caution. "How much of it was real?" he asked. "None of it," Tracy/Katerina replied. "I was 17 when Victor selected me for this mission. Everything you knew about me was designed to make you fall in love with someone who didn't exist." Daniel felt something cold and final settle in his chest. Not heartbreak. That would require having had something real to lose. This was something worse. The realization that he'd been living a lie so complete that he'd never even glimpsed the truth. "So what's the offer?" Daniel asked, his voice devoid of emotion. Petrov stepped forward, sensing victory. "Simple. Your skills, your contacts, your knowledge of American security protocols. In exchange, we provide you with a new identity substantial financial compensation, and the truth about other operations that have targeted you over the years. Other operations? Oh, Mr. Bradley, did you think this was my only project? You've been a target of Russian intelligence for over a decade. Some of your most trusted contacts, some of your most successful missions, some of your closest relationships, all carefully orchestrated to gather intelligence or position you where we needed you. The scope of the manipulation was staggering. Daniel thought about every major decision he'd made in the past 10 years, wondering how many of them had been influenced by people who were working for his enemies. And if I refuse? Then you die here, tonight, and Katerina returns to her real life as my niece and heir. Either way, the Daniel Bradley identity ends tonight. Daniel was quiet for a long moment, apparently considering the offer. Behind Petrov, the guards relaxed slightly, reading his silence as capitulation. There's just one thing I don't understand, Daniel said finally. Yes, if Katerina is your niece, and if this has all been an elaborate intelligence operation, why did you try to have us both killed at Miller's Point? Petrov's expression flickered for just a moment. The operation had run its course. It was time to eliminate all evidence, including your own niece. Katerina knew the risks. Daniel nodded slowly, then looked directly at Tracy/Katerina. Is that what you thought? That your uncle was willing to sacrifice you to clean up his operation? Something shifted in her expression, a crack in the confident facade. Victor explained the Americans were closing in. It was necessary to eliminate everyone who could testify about the network, including you. Daniel's voice was gentle, almost sympathetic. You weren't extracted from FBI custody, Katerina. You escaped because Victor's people were coming to kill you too. The silence in the room was absolute. Petrov's face had gone very still, and his guards were beginning to look uncertain. You see, Daniel continued, I've spent the last week studying your uncle's operational methods. He doesn't leave witnesses, and he doesn't trust family loyalty over operational security. You've been programmed twice, once with false memories to make you fall in love with me, and again with false loyalty to make you trust the man who ordered your death. Katerina's eyes widened as the implications sank in. She looked at Petrov with growing horror. Uncle, is that true? Petrov's hand moved toward his shoulder holster, but Daniel was already moving. The first shot took the guard on the left in the chest. The second dropped the guard on the right. Petrov's weapon cleared leather just as Daniel's third shot took him the shoulder, spinning him around and sending his gun flying across the room. In the sudden silence, Daniel walked over to where Petrov lay bleeding on the marble floor. The thing about psychological warfare, Daniel said conversationally, is that it works both ways. He looked at Katerina, who was staring at her uncle with a mixture of shock and rage. The question now is what you choose to do with the truth. But as Daniel watched her face, he realized that the choice had already been made. Whatever programming had controlled her was breaking down, replaced by the cold fury of someone who had finally understood how completely she'd been betrayed. Viktor Petrov had created the perfect weapon to destroy Daniel Bradley's life. He just hadn't realized that weapon would eventually be pointed at him. Chapter 9, Blood and Ashes. The study fell silent except for Viktor Petrov's labored breathing and the distant sound of sirens approaching the compound. Daniel stood over the wounded Russian, his weapon trained on the man who had orchestrated 3 years of psychological warfare, while Katerina sat motionless in the leather chair, staring at her uncle with eyes that held no trace of the woman who had called herself Tracy. The Montenegro police will be here in 15 minutes, Daniel said, checking his watch. Enough time to finish this conversation. Petrov pressed his hand against his wounded shoulder, blood seeping between his fingers. Despite his injury, his voice remained steady. You think you've won something, Mr. Bradley? This changes nothing. Katerina is still what we made her. You're still the man who fell in love with a lie. Maybe, but you're still the man who's about to die for it. Daniel knelt beside Petrov, placing the suppressor of his pistol against the Russian's temple. Before I pull this trigger, I want you to understand something. This isn't about revenge for what you did to me. This is about justice for all the people you've killed over the years. Justice? Petrov laughed, a sound like breaking glass. From a man who's killed more people than I have. From someone whose hands are covered in blood from 3 continents. The difference, Daniel said quietly, is that I killed enemies. You killed innocents. Innocents. Petrov's eyes flicked toward Katerina. Tell him, my dear niece. Tell him about the innocents you've killed in service to our cause. Katerina spoke for the first time since the shooting, her voice flat and emotionless. 17 people. Over 8 years of operations. Some were targets, some were collateral damage, some were just in the wrong place at the wrong time. Daniel absorbed this information without changing expression. The woman he'd thought was his wife had been a professional killer long before she'd been programmed to seduce him. Every tender moment, every intimate conversation, every declaration of love had come from someone whose hands were stained with innocent blood. Does that change your mind about justice, Mr. Bradley? Daniel stood up, his weapon still trained on Petrov. No, it just changes who receives it. The gunshot was muffled by the suppressor, but the effect was immediate. Viktor Petrov's eyes went blank, and his body relaxed into the stillness of death. Daniel turned to face Katerina, who hadn't moved during the execution. Your turn. She looked up at him without fear. I suppose you have questions. Just one. Were you ever going to tell me the truth? Which truth? That I was programmed to love you, or that underneath the programming, I actually did? The question hung between them like a blade. Daniel studied her face, looking for deception, for manipulation, for any sign that this was another layer of the psychological warfare that had defined their relationship. The programming created false memories, Katerina continued, but it couldn't create false emotions. The woman who loved you was real, even if everything else about her was fabricated. And the affair with Warren? The Katerina part of me asserting itself. The trained operative trying to complete her mission by getting closer to his intelligence network. But also, she paused, struggling with words. Also the only way I could rebel against loving someone I was supposed to destroy. Daniel walked to the window, looking out at the compound where his psychological warfare had turned Petrov's security forces against each other. In the distance, he could see police vehicles approaching, their lights flashing like angry stars. What happens now? Katerina asked. Now you make a choice. You can try to escape before the police arrive, disappear into whatever network Viktor left behind, and continue being the weapon he created. Or you can stay and face justice for the 17 people you killed. And if I choose justice, then you'll spend the rest of your life in prison, and maybe find some peace in paying for what you've done. Katerina was quiet for a moment, contemplating a future that offered no good options. What about you? What happens to Daniel Bradley? Daniel Bradley died tonight, along with Viktor Petrov and the woman who called herself Tracy. What's left is just someone who has to live with the consequences of loving a lie. The sirens were getting closer. Daniel could hear vehicles in the compound's driveway, voices shouting in Montenegrin, the sound of boots on marble floors below. I need to go, Daniel said, moving toward the window that led to the balcony and his planned escape route. Danny, wait. He turned back to look at her one final time. Katerina had stood up from the chair, and for a moment, he could see traces of the woman he'd thought was his wife. The soft expression, the vulnerability, the love that might have been real even if everything else was false. I'm sorry, she said, for all of it, for the lies, for the betrayal, for not being the woman you deserve to love. Daniel studied her face, memorizing details he would carry for the rest of his life. I know. Then he was gone, disappearing over the balcony as the police reached the 3rd floor. Katerina heard them shouting, heard the door being kicked in, heard the gasps as they discovered the bodies. She remained standing beside her uncle's corpse, her hands visible and empty, as armed officers flooded into the room. When they demanded she identify herself, she answered truthfully for perhaps the first time in 8 years. My name is Katerina Volkov. I am a Russian intelligence operative, and I surrender myself to the authorities. As the police handcuffed her and read charges in broken English, Katerina caught a glimpse of movement on the hillside beyond the compound. A single figure making his way toward the coastline, moving with the purposeful stride of someone who had finally finished a job. Daniel Bradley had kept his promise. The people responsible for destroying his life were dead or facing justice. The network that had manipulated him for years was exposed and broken. But as Katerina was led away in handcuffs, she wondered if he understood the true cost of his victory. He'd won the war against his enemies, but in doing so, he'd lost everything that made the victory worth having. 3 days later, Agent Rosa Schaefer received an encrypted message with attachments containing complete intelligence on Viktor Petrov's American network. 47 arrests followed, including corrupt officials in 6 states and 3 federal agencies. The largest counterintelligence operation in FBI history was credited to anonymous sources and closed dozens of cases that had been stalled for years. Katerina Volkov was extradited to the United States, where she pled guilty to multiple charges and received life in prison without possibility of parole. During her sentencing, she made a statement to the court. "I killed 17 innocent people in service to causes I believed in. I betrayed a man who loved me because I was programmed to do so. I cannot undo these actions, but I can spend the rest of my life ensuring that the intelligence I possess is used to prevent others from following the same path." The judge noted her cooperation with federal authorities and recommended she be housed in a facility where her intelligence background could be used for counterterrorism education. And somewhere in the world, a man who was no longer Daniel Bradley read about the trial in a newspaper while sitting in a cafe in a city where no one knew his name. He'd built a new identity, taken on new work, started a new life that bore no resemblance to the suburban existence he'd shared with the woman who hadn't really existed. He felt no satisfaction at Viktor Petrov's death, no relief at Katerina's imprisonment, no joy at the destruction of the network that had targeted him. Justice had been served, revenge had been completed, but the cost had been everything he'd thought he'd wanted from life. Daniel Bradley had learned the fundamental truth about betrayal. Sometimes winning meant accepting that you'd lost everything worth fighting for in the first place. But he'd also learned something else. He'd learned that some prices were worth paying, and some battles were worth fighting even when victory felt like defeat. The man who was no longer Daniel Bradley finished his coffee, folded his newspaper, and walked out into a world where he could trust no one completely, but feared no one either. He'd become exactly what his enemies had always claimed he was. A ghost who could disappear at will, strike without warning, and leave no trace of his passing. It wasn't the life he'd planned, but it was the life their betrayal had earned. And in the end, that was justice enough.
This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your precious time. If you enjoyed this story, then please make sure you subscribe to this channel. That would help me a lot. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.